What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 150 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today I want to continue talking about the modern pulp revival books that I've been talking about over the last few days with a book called Noir. This is by Victor Gischler and Andrea Muti. This is from Dynamite Comics. It is a 5-issue miniseries that is kind of a spin-off of The Shadow, who you can see right here. The Shadow had an ongoing series from Dynamite Comics around this time. I have not read any of that series. I have not read any of the modern Shadow stories. So I should go ahead and say that I think this book might work a little bit better if you have read some of that Shadow stuff, or at least the arc that was written by Victor Gischler, because that was a series that had rotating creative teams, and so you might not necessarily need to read the arc by Garth Ennis, for example, but you might need to read the arc by Victor Gischler because that introduces the character of the Black Sparrow, who you see on the cover of this book. Having said that, this book is a little bit of a cheat. It tries to reel in people by putting the Shadow on the cover and making you think that this is going to be a big Shadow team-up story, and it's not at all. After the first issue, the Shadow does not show up again in the rest of this book. The first issue starts off with the Black Sparrow meeting up with Lamont Cranston, aka the Shadow, and saying, hey, you and I need to talk, and then it's acting like these two are going to be teaming up on some grand adventure, and then at the end of issue 1, these two go their separate ways, more or less accidentally, and then we don't see the Shadow again for the rest of this book. And I guess that means that Victor Gischler was actually much more interested in teaming up the Black Sparrow with Miss Fury, who you can see here dressed up like a cat. Having said that, I don't like that they cheated and they were trying to make people think that the Shadow was a big part of this book, but it's also kind of understandable because if they didn't put the Shadow on this book, I probably wouldn't have bought it. The only reason that I bought it was because I thought it was going to be kind of like King's Watch or Masks, or one of those books that teams up a whole bunch of these modern pulp characters in a new story, but perhaps set back in the old days. I would not have bought this if it just had the Black Sparrow and Miss Fury on it. So I can understand why they did that, but at the same time, it disappoints me that they were being a little bit misleading with this cover, putting the Shadow on there, but they really had no intention of using the Shadow in this story any more than they did. And they really didn't use the Shadow that much at all in this story. Also, even when you get right past the fact that it's misleading, it's not very good writing. The first issue is almost entirely narrated by the Shadow, and then after that, it's not narrated by him anymore because he's not there anymore. It's not very good writing just from a writing standpoint. But getting past all of that, getting past the fact that I wish that they didn't do that, or I wish that they had used the Shadow a little bit more in this book, is this story worth reading? I would say it's okay. If I want to compare it to some of the other modern pulp revivals that I've talked about here lately, I would say that this is probably better than Zeitgeist, but not as good as King's Watch. I think this is better than Zeitgeist because it has quite a few more characters than that story does, but it does a better job of developing and defining these characters than Zeitgeist did. This is only 5 issues long, and while it's not perfect, it doesn't do a great job of fully fleshing out every single character that shows up in this book. It does do a better job than Zeitgeist did, where it only developed and defined 2 characters in the span of 10 issues. So I think this is better than Zeitgeist, but it's not quite as accomplished as King's Watch, which took 4 or 5 pretty main characters and gave each of them a good moment in the span of 5 issues. The big problem that I have with this book is you have 2 main female characters, and in the foreword of this book, Victor Gischler talked about how he was creating the Black Sparrow for his Shadow arc, and then meanwhile, Robbie Williams, I think, was creating Miss Fury for Dynamite Comics right around the same time, and Gischler was more or less admitting that both of these characters are basically the exact same character. And that kind of comes through when you're reading this book. Neither one of these characters really feels different from the other one. One of them speaks Spanish occasionally. They won't actually speak Spanish. They will just say a Spanish word every now and then. They might say something like, ay caramba, or something like that. It's very not organic at all, and I feel like the only reason that Gischler does that is so that we can tell these two apart, because there are times when they're both out of costume, and I have no idea which one is Miss Fury, and I have no idea which one is the Black Sparrow. And then whenever they're in costume, it's a little easier to tell them apart, but as far as their personalities and their character characteristics, they're really not that different from each other. They're both basically the same character. They're both after this hidden treasure that's somewhere in Rhode Island, and they're both on this adventure, allegedly for different reasons, but then by the end of the book, I'm not entirely sure if it is for different reasons. Miss Fury says that she's only here because it's fun, and she's an adrenaline junkie, whereas the Black Sparrow actually wants the money that is in this secret adventure that they're going on. But then, by the end of the book, I kind of get the feeling that Miss Fury is lying and that she actually does want the money, and so that makes it very difficult for me to actually differentiate these two characters. If you're going to team up two characters like this, I want them to be different enough so that it's interesting to see them teamed up. I don't want to see two characters who are exactly identical team up with each other because that's boring. I don't want to see that. I want to see a little bit of friction between these characters. Overall, I think that this book is okay. If you don't care about the Shadow and you just want to see a 1930s treasure hunt story featuring two Catwoman-esque characters, there you go, then this is the book for you. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a whole lot of people out there who want to see two Catwoman-esque characters go on a treasure hunt in the 1930s. I don't think that that is a very large audience, or if it is, it's an audience that I'm not very familiar with. Overall, I think this is a book that I could have enjoyed. I went into this expecting it to be a whole lot of fun, and this book ultimately kind of disappointed me. It was not the worst of the pulp revival books that I've talked about here lately, but it's also not very good either. I expected a whole lot more, and unfortunately this book did not deliver. So overall, those are my thoughts on Noir by Gishler and Muti. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with a different video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.